At 70 years old, Mel Gibson stands as a figure both larger than life and weighed down by it. Once crowned Hollywood's most bankable star, his face was splashed across billboards from New York to Tokyo, the ultimate symbol of power, charisma, and box office dominance. Yet now, that same face carries deep lines carved not just by age, but by scandal, regret, and the relentless scrutiny of a world that once adored him. The headlines tell the story in brutal shorthand. From box office king to cancelled icon. Paparazzi flashes freeze him mid-scowl, mid-stumble, mid-meltdown. Tabloid covers scream of excess, arrogance, and self-destruction. Social media memes reduce his decades of artistry into a punchline. For younger fans, he's not the daring hero of Lethal Weapon or the visionary behind Braveheart. He's the man whose outbursts and controversies became global news, a cautionary tale in the digital age. But here's what most don't see. Behind the camera flashes, beyond the viral headlines, lies a man who shaped cinema, redefined stardom, and built an empire, only to watch it collapse under the weight of his own flaws. The tragedy isn't just in his fall, but in the haunting possibility that his greatest battle has nothing to do with Hollywood at all. Because behind the cameras, the truth is darker than anyone imagined. Long before the flashing cameras and the red carpets, Mel Gibson's story began in the quiet struggles of an immigrant family. Born in New York but raised in Australia after his father sought a fresh start, Gibson grew up straddling two worlds, American roots and Australian grit. Money was scarce, the household strict, but the young boy carried something unteachable, a restless energy, a spark that refused to be dimmed. For a kid with no roadmap to stardom, that spark became his compass. Acting entered his life almost by chance, but once it did, the world shifted. On the stage, his rough edges smoothed into charm, his volatility transformed into magnetism. Casting directors saw it instantly. He wasn't just another hopeful actor, he was a force, the kind of presence audiences couldn't look away from. That raw potential exploded onto the global screen with Mad Max. Low budget, brutal, and electric, the film didn't just introduce Gibson, it announced him. Almost overnight, he was the face of a new kind of cinema. Gritty, dangerous, unforgettable. Then came Lethal Weapon. Paired with Danny Glover, Gibson brought an intensity that was both charismatic and unhinged. The world fell in love with the reckless cop who was somehow both broken and bulletproof. Hollywood crowned him its golden son, and for a moment, it felt like nothing could stop him. He was the immigrant's dream realized, a man who started with nothing and became everything. But what no one realized was that the same fire audiences adored, the intensity, the unpredictability, the refusal to be tamed, wasn't just an act. It was real, and it was dangerous, because the same fire that made him unstoppable would soon set his world ablaze. With Lethal Weapon cementing his status as a global superstar, Mel Gibson's life transformed into the kind of Hollywood fantasy most only dream of. Palatial mansions perched on California hills became his sanctuary. He drove sleek sports cars that gleamed like trophies of success, each one a symbol of a man who had conquered the industry. The paychecks grew astronomical, millions per film, turning Gibson into one of the highest-paid actors of his generation. For audiences, he wasn't just a celebrity, he was the rugged everyman who had become untouchable. The media fawned over him, painting him as Hollywood's golden warrior. Tough enough to lead action blockbusters, charismatic enough to draw crowds, and charming enough to captivate talk shows. Paparazzi photos captured him at glittering premieres, laughing with the elite, glass of champagne in hand. To fans across the globe, he was larger than life. A blend of grit, sex appeal, and undeniable talent. But beneath the glitter, the first cracks began to show. On set, whispers spread about a fiery temper and unpredictable moods. At parties, the laughter sometimes carried an edge, the alcohol flowing a little too freely. What many dismissed as bad boy charm began to hint at something more dangerous. Arrogance creeping in, recklessness simmering just below the surface. Still, Hollywood couldn't get enough. Every film deal, every headline, every photo op only fed the myth of Gibson as invincible. Yet myths, no matter how dazzling, are fragile. And Gibson's was about to be tested in ways no blockbuster script could prepare him for. Because soon, the headlines shifted from success to scandal. The empire Mel Gibson had built with charm, grit, and undeniable talent began to unravel under the weight of his own demons. What the public once mistook for bad boy charisma soon revealed itself as something far more destructive. The whispers about his volatility became headlines, and those headlines became global scandals. Reports of substance abuse surfaced, stories of nights blurred by alcohol, of a man who seemed hell-bent on testing how far he could push the limits of his fame. Then came the rants, explosive, hateful, and impossible to defend. Gibson's words were splashed across every screen, dissected on every talk show. The man once adored as Hollywood's golden warrior was suddenly cast as its most infamous villain. Rivalries turned into public feuds, colleagues distanced themselves, and studios that once courted him for blockbuster deals began to slam their doors shut. The narrative shifted in real time. Gibson was no longer the hero of his own story. He was the cautionary tale. For fans, the disillusionment cut deep. They had grown up with him as the face of bravery, resilience, and larger-than-life masculinity. To see their hero crumble in such spectacular fashion was heartbreaking. Some defended him, clinging to the brilliance of his films, while others recoiled, disgusted by the rage and arrogance that seemed to pour from his every word. The media, always hungry for spectacle, leaned into the downfall. Tabloids branded him a fallen star, while late-night hosts turned his scandals into punchlines. His name, once synonymous with box office glory, became shorthand for self-destruction. And yet, beneath the mockery and outrage, there lingered a haunting question. Was Gibson the victim of his own unchecked fire? Or had Hollywood itself helped fuel the flames? One thing was certain, the world wasn't done watching, because the storm was only beginning. If Gibson's scandals cracked his public image, the escalation shattered it into pieces. Paparazzi stalked his every move, cameras flashing not to celebrate a star, but to capture a man unraveling. Late-night arguments, stumbles outside bars, tense confrontations, all of it was documented, sold, and broadcast to millions hungry for more drama. What once was admiration had turned into voyeurism, and Gibson became the spectacle. Then came the leaked recordings, angry tirades that were impossible to walk back. These weren't movie lines delivered for effect. They were raw, unfiltered eruptions that painted a picture of rage and bitterness. The tapes spread like wildfire, played on repeat across news networks, dissected in op-eds, and ridiculed on comedy sketches. Overnight, Gibson wasn't just an actor with issues. He became a cultural flashpoint, the embodiment of arrogance and downfall. Hollywood reacted swiftly. Studios that once banked on his name as a guarantee for box office gold now cut ties without hesitation. Projects evaporated, endorsements vanished, and doors that had been wide open slammed shut. The man who once commanded millions now found himself toxic, a pariah, in the very industry he had once ruled. Social media poured salt into the wound. Memes mocked his rants. Hashtags trended with his name attached to scandal. And the digital age ensured that every mistake lived forever. For younger audiences, Gibson wasn't a cinematic legend. He was a living meme, a cautionary tale of self-destruction amplified by technology. It was humiliation on a global stage, a downfall playing out in real time. Yet as devastating as it was, Gibson's story wasn't finished. There was still one moment, one turning point, that would define his fate more than any headline. And then came the moment that changed everything forever. Just when it seemed Mel Gibson's career had collapsed beyond repair, an unexpected spark reignited the story. Hollywood loves a downfall, but it also craves a comeback. And Gibson, the fighter who had once defied all odds, wasn't ready to disappear. After years in exile, he returned not as the charming star of action blockbusters, but as the visionary director behind Hacksaw Ridge. The film stunned audiences and critics alike. It wasn't just good. It was powerful, raw, and deeply human. Suddenly, whispers of redemption echoed through the industry. Awards season brought him back to the spotlight this time, not as a disgraced pariah, but as a creator whose artistry could not be denied. For a fleeting moment, Gibson seemed reborn. Fans who had written him off were forced to reconsider. Could the man once branded irredeemable still have something meaningful to offer the world? But even in victory, the past clung to him like a shadow. Interviews circled back to his scandals. Public debates reignited: should one great film erase years of offensive words and destructive behavior? To some, Hacksaw Ridge was proof of growth. To others, it was a reminder of how far he had fallen. The redemption arc was fragile, balancing on a knife's edge. And as Gibson stood in the glow of his comeback, the world asked itself, was this truly a second chance? Or just a temporary pause in a storm that had not yet passed? Because even as the spotlight returned, the shadows refused to fade. Mel Gibson's attempted return didn't just stir Hollywood. It sent shockwaves through culture itself. His name became a battleground for debates far bigger than one man. Could a star so publicly disgraced ever truly be forgiven? Could brilliance in art outweigh the ugliness of personal failings? Across social media, the arguments raged like wildfire. On one side were those who saw his comeback as proof of resilience. They pointed to Hacksaw Ridge, its powerful message of courage and sacrifice, and argued that Gibson had earned a second chance. Fans tweeted talent, like this can't be erased, while others shared clips of his greatest performances, nostalgic for the hero they once adored. Hashtags calling for redemption trended as audiences revisited his films with fresh eyes, but the opposition was just as fierce. Critics argued that celebrating his return sent a dangerous message that wealth and fame could insulate even the most offensive behavior. Memes mocked his scandals, late-night hosts revived his most infamous moments, and for many younger viewers, Gibson remained a symbol of arrogance and unchecked privilege. Hollywood insiders were equally divided. Some openly supported his artistry, while others vowed never to work with him again. What emerged was more than a career debate. It was a cultural litmus test. Gibson's story reflected the fractures of a society grappling with cancel culture, redemption, and accountability. Was he the fallen icon clawing his way back, or the cautionary tale who should remain in the shadows? And as Gibson turned 71, heartbreaking truth rose above the noise. No matter the brilliance of his art, the scars of his past would never fully fade. And as the world weighed his legacy, one question lingered: what would Mel Gibson's story ultimately mean? At 70, Mel Gibson stands not as the untouchable titan he once was, but as a man weathered by both triumph and tragedy. His life is a mirror held up to Hollywood itself, glittering, intoxicating, and yet merciless when the shine begins to fade. For decades, he embodied resilience on screen, the kind of character who could take a punch and rise again. Off-screen, that resilience was tested in ways far harsher than any script could imagine. The tragedy of his story is not just in the scandals or the controversies. It lies in the reminder that unchecked power, arrogance, and excess can turn even the brightest star into a shadow of himself. Yet within that darkness, there remains a sliver of something undeniably human. The same man who brought audiences unforgettable stories of courage and sacrifice also embodies the flaws, the fragility, and the contradictions that exist in all of us. For his fans, Gibson's legacy is complicated, equal parts admiration and disappointment. But perhaps that is where the lesson lies. Success without humility is a dangerous fire, and fame without grounding can consume even the strongest. His journey speaks not just of downfall, but of the universal struggle to find redemption, to confront one's demons, and to remember that authenticity and humility matter more than any box office crown. Because in the end, Gibson's story is not only about a man, it is about the cost of forgetting what truly makes us human. And so the story of Mel Gibson at 70 is more than a tale of stardom and scandal. It is a cautionary epic. He rose from obscurity to dominate the box office, only to fall from grace in the most public way possible. His life reminds us that even legends are human, fragile, and vulnerable to their own demons. It reminds us, too, that fame is not a shield, but a magnifying glass, amplifying both brilliance and brokenness for the world to see. For audiences who once adored him, the tragedy cuts deeper because it feels personal. We cheered his triumphs, we watched his collapse, and we've been left with questions that refuse to fade. Can a man truly redeem himself? And should society allow him that chance? These aren't just Gibson's questions, they're ours, echoed through every story of celebrity power and downfall. But perhaps the ultimate lesson isn't about Gibson alone. It is about what we choose to celebrate, what we choose to forgive, and what we demand from those we put on pedestals. His rise and fall challenge us to look inward at our own hunger for fame, power, and validation. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told raw, dramatic, and unfiltered, then subscribe now. Join us as we uncover more untold truths of fame, fortune, and redemption.